Hey, and we are live. I'm Andy Williams, and this is my creatively curious Substack. And every Friday, I have a chat with some interesting creative people for about 15 minutes. And I'm joined by creative comedian, um, show producer, writer extraordinaire, Tiernan Douieb. Great to have you on the show.
Hello, it's lovely to be here. Thanks for having me, Andy.
Great. So what I've tended to do with all of my chats is to kind of kick it off with a question on, I don't know, well, actually, before we get into that, maybe if you could just give everyone a kind of a brief snapshot on what you've been working on and what you do and what and where people can find you.
I've been working on loads. It's been great. I'm on about 5 kids animation shows at the moment. I can't say all of them. I think I can say more than I thought. One was announced the other day. So I'm on a CBBC sketch show, which is head up by Paul Whitehouse. That's going to be an animated sketch show coming out later this year, I think, or early next year. I'm on a Moondog Sanrio collab, which is lovely. Alpha Blocks for CBBS and Tim Rex for Nickelodeon. And then there's one I can't talk about, which is hopefully going to come to Netflix at some point. So it's lovely and busy at the moment, and I cannot complain. I do complain, but I can't really complain. Yeah.
That's amazing. So, and that's kind of, wow, that's a full slate of shows. That
Yeah.
is very, very impressive. Let's kind of rewind right back to the start though. And what I tend to ask people to kick things off is to give me what they'd call their origin story. And that might be where the kind of the spark of what you do was ignited, or it might be just as easy, it could be when that door opened and you started on your career, or both.
Okay, it's tricky because I think a lot of my career hasn't been intentional. I suppose.
Right.
I mean, I've always been an annoying show off. I've always enjoyed talking and performing, and I think from the age of 4, when I got to be little drummer boy at school, or my teacher was like, "He's going to be an actor," and that was my dream. I was like, "Right, I'm going to be an actor," and I went to Mount View Theatre.
Really, that's great.
Yeah, I went to theatre school on the weekends in between school and did drama of GCSE, and I always wanted to act, and then that all changed because I went to uni to do drama because I couldn't afford to go to drama school to do drama. I went to uni. I had a teacher, a lecturer at uni called Dr. Oliver Double, who was a doctor of comedy, and he taught a course in stand-up comedy. And I did it and went, "This is the greatest thing I've ever done." And we had to perform 10 minutes of comedy to the students' union. I felt sick, and I got up, and the first laugh I got, I thought, this is the best thing that has ever happened to me. And it just felt like, well, this is what I have to do.
Amazing.
So it was.
That's not a typical story because a lot of people do stand up for the first time, and the story I always hear is that they died, they bombed. So
yeah.
So your first kind of rodeo, you managed to kind of immediately get some laughs from that.
It was kind of cheating though, Andy, because the thing was, I did it at university, so the audience were all friends and colleagues, and I did several gigs like that. And then it was when I left university and started gigging to people who weren't students and didn't care about my student material that I realized what a brutal comedy death could be. And you learn very quickly to adapt and change. It was quite a different world, but I don't know. I think that I always say to people that talk about doing comedy, like, from the first gig whether it goes well or badly. If you ever want to do it again.
Really?
I don't know if it's a sort of sociopathic need. I don't know if it's there's something wrong with you that gives you that need, but there's definitely you crave it. And then that was my career for just about 20 years. I gigged all over the world. I got to do all the weekend clubs. I was a main support for Frankie Boyle for 7 years, and sort of worked on his TV show. And I wrote for some other big comedians too. And I just had a great time, but it's a lot of travel. It's a lot of late nights, a lot of terrible service station food, and and sometimes audiences you just think, "Oh, I wish I hadn't done that one." But yeah, so that was it. And I did, during that time, I did some writing. I did write for I pitched. I was also co-running a thing called Comedy Club for Kids, and we do stand up for children 6+. And that's in theatres all over, but we got professional comedians come and do sets for kids. And I sort of got brought into that by the comedian that started it and ended up taking it over with 2 others. And through that, I did kids shows, and I wrote for, I had a kids show that was optioned, and I did various bits, but I never quite landed into TV. And it was only during the pandemic when comedy was made illegal that I got an email. It felt out of the blue, although it's from someone I sort of knew vaguely, and it was they were
Right.
asking me to write for Hey Dougie, and it was incredible because my daughter was a big fan. I was a big fan as well, and it saved me when I had pretty much everything else cancelled because of COVID. So, and then that's led to
Right.
really. I did some gigs when COVID got, passed, but then I kind of realized that this world is, I love it. I love this world. I love writing for animation. I love the people that I work with. And I just, I'd always been a fan of animation anyway, but I just didn't think I just had never thought of it as a world to.
That's amazing.
So.
Do you think so? Was like the pandemic and the whole lockdowns, was that almost a bit of a sliding doors moment? Do you think you might still be doing the comedy circuit if it wasn't for that?
Yeah, I think so. Having a break from it, because I was gigging several times a week, every single week, and lots of traveling, and it's when you're forced to have a break from it, you suddenly realize, oh, hang on, I don't know if I want to go back to that, and I don't think I'd ever really thought about it. It was my job, and I was getting on with it, and I was always finding ways to keep it interesting. I was always writing new material and trying to, go to places I hadn't been before. But when you're forced to have a break, suddenly you have to reevaluate. And it also, it really coincided with me being a parent too. My daughter was about 2 just before the pandemic kicked, and suddenly, the thought of going back and having to do late nights and early mornings was really hard. And I think it all came about at the same sort of time. And it felt really, I'm not one to sort of believe in like fated stuff, but it felt really fated. That email arriving felt like, oh wow, this is how things are going to go.
Amazing. That's beautiful. That's wonderful. And so Hey Dougie, I think that show is quite kind of distinctive and not necessarily exactly like a lot of other animation shows. So do you think that made it harder or easier to be that? Because that was kind of your first gig. You've done other stuff in for animation and shows, but that was your first kind of ongoing gig in animation. Is that right?
Yeah. No, that was my first.
And did the system, was it hard to kind of fit into that, or did it feel, like a duck to water?
I think there's two things to it. One is that I should say the Studio AKA team and then Jenny Landreth, who's script editor, was so lovely, and they made a point of saying, we will hold your hand through this. We will make sure you learn how to do this. We're not just going to throw you in the deep end. And they were wonderful in taking me through. I do think also, for better or worse, comedy gives you a strangely tough skin and a weird sense of confidence because, I don't know, about 10 years into, we sort of talk about in the comedy industry, once you get 10 years in, you're not really phased by any room. You can walk into a room of 2 people or 2,000 people and it feels the same, and you just know how to play it.
You're kind of bulletproof.
Yeah, and similarly, you deal with, unfortunately, heckles from all sorts, and so suddenly a script note or 2 doesn't feel that bad, and and people who are there to help you out, it all feels the kind of collaborative nature of animation, and I think the willingness to make sure that you're all working together to make something lovely just felt amazing. I don't know. It felt like such a, so it didn't. It's obviously daunting, and especially with the Hey Dougie, you don't want to let down all those millions of kids that watch it. But I think I felt they were so nice to me and so good with helping me figure out how to do my first script with them, which was great.
That's a really interesting point. That friends of mine that do stand up, I think there has to be a tolerance of, you're kind of risking humiliation sometimes when you get up on the stage. So you need to have a kind of an inbuilt tolerance for that.
Yeah, well, it's not inbuilt,
and that probably makes you quite brave.
Stupid. I still don't know. But I think it's not inbuilt. You learn it. Like you sort of, you become tough by doing it, because there comes a point where you just realize, oh, it doesn't matter, and I know how to deal with it. And you sort of, it becomes second nature to shrug it off, and I don't know. You start to reason with. I think the first few times I really died on stage, and the first few times I was heckled quite badly, it was devastating. It took me weeks to shake it off, and then over time you realize, what does it matter? Or you learn how to silly things like take a pause, repeat the question back to them, and in that time your brain's already thought of a brilliant answer. So you have all these little tricks up your sleeve that. So I think
you've got kind of strategies for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's odd things like to reference, there's a brilliant comedian called Robin Ince, and Robin Ince wrote a whole book about comedy, and in it he talked about comedians having brain scans, like MRI scans, and they had people who weren't comedians, and they had comedians, and they were asked a series of questions, and the brain activity was monitored, and the comedians had different brain activity because they were so comfortable with the talking that they could just freely flow thoughts, whereas the other people were stressing about what to say and the impact of it. And so
Yeah.
it gives you a different, I don't know, a sort of a cheating ability to get by in chat, and confidence in what you say and how jokes land and all those sort of things that I don't think you get from other work.
I can see that. I can see that. And I think, well, so that kind of is a great example of how comedy gave you some sort of social strategies to be able to navigate the room in terms of a production. Were there any kind of creative things that really were easy to carry across from your comedy writing into animation? And were there things that you had to kind of unlearn or relearn from that transition?
Yeah, I think if I speak about the unlearning, I think there were, it's simple things like well, it's funny, isn't it? I was going to say script formatting and the bait, some of the really admin-y bits, but actually I then came to learn that everyone does it differently and everyone has their own things
Yeah.
that they need. I think there was a lot of learning what animators can and can't do, which I just had no idea about, because as an animation fan, I just, that someone told me early on about, for breakfast, write them having toast, not Rice Krispies, because otherwise it's hours of drawing little, and it was all those little things of going, oh, right, of course, and having to
Yes.
realize that, again, you're not just doing jokes for yourself like I would be, and in my voice, it was writing with a purpose for other people to adapt and do more with, and that was definitely an interesting learning curve. But I also think something I hadn't realized, and it was a director called Marcus Van Flatten, who's done Space Chickens in Space and various other stuff. He's brilliant, Norwegian director. He said to me how visual my writing was, and I'd never really
Right.
thought about it. But I think in my head, I've always thought of jokes quite visually, and it wasn't
Yeah,
until I
yeah,
wrote them down in script I was like, oh, right, that's always how they've
yeah.
been in my head. I've never, but they've been in my head. They've not been on a script. And so
Yeah, yeah. I think that
yeah,
that's a key kind of skill, I think, because I think some writers aren't naturally visual. It can be kind of more verbal and more about
mm,
the 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 kind of the dialogue. And then I think other writers are naturally more kind of visual storytellers. And with animation, the visual is such a kind of imperative, particularly in younger animation.
yeah, absolutely. And for things like, just because I'm a big fan of dialogue jokes, and that's what I write. But also, if visual jokes are so important, and to be able to play
Yeah,
them out in your head and then write them out as you see them, I think that's uh, it's. I think the tricky bit is always so this feels a bit mean, but sometimes, like, I know the timing of things. I can do it instinctively now, and sometimes translating
yeah,
that, particularly to people who read it who may not have that timing in their head, and you have to sort of explain, trust me, and it's very hard sometimes getting that trust to go, look, I promise you, I know the voice actor will do this well, I know the animators will do it, but it will play out as a gag. But you've just got to roll with
yeah.
that
And
sometimes.
was that how does that feel as well, coming from sort of a comedy environment where you have complete command of the timing, to something that ends up being more collaborative? Are there kind of bits of writing where was that a bit of an adjustment? Are there kind of writings where in some ways the timing ends up being kind of, that baton is then passed on to somebody else?
Yeah, it was weird at first, but I think stand up is more, it's not collaborative. It's lonely. You're up there by yourself, and you are doing it yourself, and you're writing. But a lot of comedians, we give each other punch ups, or you hear
Right.
someone's
Yeah. Yeah.
joke and go, "Do you know what would be a great add on to that?" And we kind of
Yeah.
share that quite freely, knowing that the joke we're giving them wouldn't work for us anyway, and so you pass it on. And I do, as I said, I write for a couple of other comedians, write callbacks for one comedian in particular. Um, so it was kind of embracing that, and I think also, to be honest, I hadn't realized I was a bit tired of working by myself. I really like having
Yeah.
someone else to look at it and be able to say, have an outside view, and sometimes click what was wrong. I had a director for Edinburgh solo shows I did, and I'd never had that before this is some years ago. And it was amazing having someone else go, oh, that gag's got 5 more minutes to it. You should swap that with that and that, and it was sort of opens up another level when I think you can't always do that for yourself. So in animation, you don't
Interesting.
have to. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. And if you were either to go back in time or to meet a younger comedian in the position that you were before you'd started working in animation, what kind of advice would you give to somebody that didn't have any experience of animation in terms of useful things for them to know if they wanted to make a move across?
Do you know, I'd really say, because I think I was a bit afraid. I think I think in comedy there's very much there's 3 big agencies and they kind of run everything. And if you're not
Yeah,
with them, you don't get a lot of stuff. And it was landing
yeah,
in
yeah,
this world is really lovely, right? Animation people are lovely, children's media people are lovely, and I hadn't realized how friendly and understanding it was, and also how much they kind of, I remember sort of saying, I haven't written much, and they sort of look back and go, but you've done all this, and it transfers. And I think I would say to
yeah,
someone in my position years ago, don't be afraid of doing this earlier, because I wish I'd known. And I think I had this fear that I don't already have credits and I'm not already famous, I can't do this.
yeah.
And it's not about that. There's a real trust in this world of, if you are creative, then we want to work with you. And I think it was really nice, a really embracing sort of attitude to have. Very refreshing. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's great. And then kind of the last question was, um, either in terms of kind of where you'd kind of really enjoy kind of moving into, is there kind of any particular area of animation that you're keen to explore, or do you have a kind of a sense of where kind of the industry as a whole is kind of moving towards? What's your kind of viewpoint on that from where you are?
Yeah, you know, it's tricky because I saw you in Annecy where we're both melting as well.
Yeah.
We only speak when it's melting, Andy. I think that's the only time we can talk. Yeah, I'm naively optimistic all the time. I'm having a lovely time right now, and I appreciate it's very subjective, and I know some people aren't. So for me, it does feel like Annecy felt very positive. CMC this week felt really
Yeah,
positive to me as
absolutely.
well, and that was a year ago. I was not in anywhere near as good a place with work, and now I'm doing loads, and people are telling me about all sorts of exciting things. So I feel like I'm hoping the understanding of co-pros and the understanding of being a bit more bold online and doing things is coming through. So I'm feeling positive. Whether or not that lasts, we'll see. But in terms of what I I always, when I did stand up, so I had Comedy Club for Kids. That was my jokes for kids. And then I would, in
Yeah,
the evenings, as I said, support Frankie Boyle and do a lot of stuff about how we are all screwed and the world is terrible. And it gave me a weird balance. And I love writing for kids so much, but I'm a big fan of adult animation. And I would love to dive into some of that and get some of those jokes out of my head that are currently just in lots of
great.
notes on my phone. That's all. But
And from what you're saying, it sounds like you're starting to make some kind of forays into more. So when you're talking about a sketch animation show, was that more of an adult animation show, the Paul Whitehouse one?
no, that's for CBBC, which is fantastic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they've just
Sorry,
announced.
I
I think
kind
it's
of
no. It's cool. I think I'm not sure if it's the official title yet, but it was in the BBC's thing last week. And I think it's currently called That's
right.
Jokes. But it's 30 seconds to 1 minute animation and different styles. It's going to be very interesting and definitely for older kids, which is good. No, I've written an adult animated short. I'm trying to work with the producer Aldney Middleton to see if we can get it off the ground. And I'm talking with a couple of places who are just daring to step into adult animation. So it's tricky.
Right.
I feel like we're a bit behind in the UK on it, but I feel like we're just
Yeah, yeah.
starting to catch up, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel like, I mean, it feels like there's a lot of potential for growth in that
Mm.
area as well. I don't think people view animation now as, if they ever did, as something that's just for kids.
Yeah, but we used to have, Monkey Dust, 2D TV, all these brilliant
Monkey Dust was
adult
great. I love
animations.
Monkey Dust.
Stressed Eric, that was the other one I love. All these ones that were
Yeah,
great. And then we've had this big gap with nothing. There's so many good, absolutely not even speaking for myself in any way. There's so many good comedy writers and writers that I think would make fantastic, and I'd want to see their animations. And so I always feel like we've got this
yeah,
big pool of people who could pull something like this together. So I'm just surprised we haven't jumped on it sooner. But there you go. Hopefully it's coming.
yeah. Well, maybe now's the time.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that was great. Thanks very much for that, Tiernan.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Andy. Lovely to chat to
Um,
you.
yeah, really good to chat. Speak to you later.
Cool. Take care. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.